Hello everyone and welcome back to the Mission Log. My name is Jason Gilbert. Last couple weeks my family and I have been out of the country on vacation, and I was not able to pack my recording gear because of lack of space. And so I apologize if for the last 2 weeks I haven't posted anything new, but I'm back and I'm ready to go. Now, before we get started today, I would like to ask you if you would consider subscribing to this channel. It would really help me out immensely. Now, today, I'm going to be reviewing Season 1, Episode 5 of Star Trek, the original series. The episode is titled, The Enemy Within. It aired on October the 6th, 1966, and the story is written by Richard Matheson. It was directed by Leo Penn, and it was produced by the series creator Gene Roddenberry. Now, this was a very interesting and engaging episode. It had some very cool camera tricks and special effects for the time, and also some very edgy content, which I will discuss as we go through this. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the story of The Enemy Within. As the episode begins, we see the Enterprise in orbit over planet Alpha 177. This is shared with us a little later on when we hear the captain's log. They are on a specimen gathering mission. On the surface, Sulu is holding a strange looking animal. Now, after a noise and a scream of pain, Kirk rushes over to crewman Fisher, who fell and is slightly injured, and he's covered in yellow dust and dirt. Kirk orders him to beam up and go directly to sickbay. And in a communication with Scotty, Scott mentions that they are having some trouble with the transporter. A little later, Kirk says he's ready to beam up. Scott examines the controls and locks onto Kirk. Kirk materializes, but he's dizzy. Scott suggests that he see McCoy, and as the two of them leave, a second Kirk materializes on the transporter pad, and he looks dark and evil. And we fade out into the title sequence. Now, there is a lot involved in this episode, and I will share the story as simply as I can. We hear a captain's log where Kirk mentions that unbeknownst to him, a transporter malfunction occurred and created a duplicate of himself. The duplicate acts very strange and aggressive while he is weak and subdued. And so for the sake of simplicity, I will refer to the subdued Kirk as Kirk 1 and the aggressive one as Kirk 2. Now, Kirk 2 saunters into sickbay and demands that McCoy give him some Syrian brandy. Kirk takes the brandy and then leaves. He wanders through the corridor drinking when he notices that he is outside of Rand's quarters. And he enters her quarters, but she is not there. Kirk 1 is in his quarters and Spock comes in to see him. Spock has received a report from Dr. McCoy that the captain was acting like a wild man. Kirk 1 mentions that it wasn't him because he had not gone into sickbay. Kirk 1 and Spock enter the transporter room at the request of Scott. Scott is holding the same animal that Sulu had earlier. Now, Sulu must have had the animal beamed up while he and some of the crew are still on the surface collecting specimens. Scott explains that a transporter malfunction occurred, and he shows Kirk an exact duplicate of the animal materialized on the transporter immediately after the animal was beamed aboard. The second animal was mean and aggressive while the first was subdued. And Scott indicated that the second animal was not a duplicate, but an opposite. One gentle, the other mean. And Scott then says that they dare not beam the others off of the planet until they can repair the transporter, because this very same thing could happen to them. Kirk looks concerned, I think for two reasons. One, the possibility of a duplicate of himself, and secondly, he's concerned and scared for the crew on the planet, because that planet reaches minus 120 degrees Fahrenheit at nighttime. Rand comes back to her quarters, and Kirk too is inside there watching her. Now, remember earlier I said that there was some edgy content, and this is it. Parents, I want to caution you, if you decide to watch this episode with your children, please have them leave the room for a few moments or forward through this scene. Kirk too advances towards her. He is flirting with her and then forces himself onto her. And it's here where he kisses her against her will. By the way, this would be the first time we see Kirk kissing a woman on Star Trek, and there are many, many more kissing scenes to come, okay? Now, it turns disturbing quickly as he forces her to the floor. I believe what is implied is that there is an intent to rape her. She scratches his face and tries to get away. Thankfully, crewman Fisher comes by, her door opens, and he sees what's happening, and Rand yells for him to call for help, which he does, and Kirk too attacks him. Now, report gets back to Kirk 1 and Spock as to what happened to Rand. They enter a turbo lift in an attempt to find out what is going on. And in an amazing camera trick, as the camera zooms back, the turbo lift doors close and a bloodied Kirk 2 appears on the screen. Kirk 1 with Spock and McCoy are speaking with Rand, who is understandably shaken up by the events, and she explains what Kirk did. Kirk 1 said it wasn't him. Spock said that obviously there is an imposter on board the ship. On the surface of the planet, the temperature is dropping rapidly, putting the men down there in danger. Kirk 1 asks Sulu to hold on, and then he orders search parties to capture Kirk 2, but to be careful as not to kill him. We see that Kirk 1 is not functioning properly and orders Spock to keep checking up on him. He's lost his strength of will and is quickly losing his decision-making capacity. Kirk 1 makes a ship-wide announcement about the imposter. Kirk 2 sees this announcement on screen, and he keeps yelling, "I'm Captain Kirk." And he finds some makeup and covers up the scratches. And he opens the door, and he sees a crewman. He asks for his phaser and then knocks him out. And it's here where we see a Shatner chop. The men on the planet are getting very cold, as it is now minus 20. We see Kirk 1 struggling. Spock suggests that Kirk 2 has the same knowledge of the ship as Kirk 1 and suggests they try to outguess him. Kirk 1 said that if he were Kirk 2, he would go to the lower decks to hide. And so Spock and Kirk go down there and search for him. We see for the very first time what the lower decks of the USS Enterprise look like. Kirk 1 and Spock spread out, looking for Kirk 2. Kirk 2 is on top of the equipment. He spots them looking for him. And then we see an interesting encounter as both Kirks see each other, and a struggle is about to ensue. But then Spock gives Kirk 2 the Vulcan neck pinch. And we then see Kirk 1 and Kirk 2 together on the screen. A great special effect for the year 1966. In sickbay, McCoy suggests that Kirk 2 be bound. They can't tranquilize him because it might injure him further. Spock speaks and says that there is a unique opportunity here to study the human mind and to study the roles of both good and evil in a person. He says that the dark, aggressive side of the captain is what makes him strong, while it is tempered by the good, calm, positive side of the captain. And both sides are what make Kirk a great captain, but when separated from his darker side, it takes away Kirk's power to command effectively. At this point, Sulu calls in with a report from the planet. Temperature is continuing to drop, and they are struggling. Kirk calls Scott on the progress of the transporter repair, and it's where Scott says that it can't be repaired in less than a week. I guess at this early point in the series, the writers and producers haven't conceived of the shuttlecraft yet. And we see Sulu using his phaser to heat the rocks. In sickbay, Kirk 2 is not doing well. He's dying. Kirk 1 comes alongside of him and ends up holding his hand and tells him to not be afraid. And this brings Kirk 2's levels to normal. Spock summons Kirk 1 to the transporter room as he indicated that they may have found an answer to the transporter problem. And as he leaves, we see Kirk 2 laughing. In the transporter room, Scott and Spock figured out a way to get the transporter working. They're going to send the two animals through the transporter and then reversing it in the hopes that one animal will return completely intact with both good and bad sides. They sent the animal through the transporter and then they reverse it. One animal does in fact return back, but it had died from the shock of being put back together. This leaves Kirk 1 with very little hope. Spock and McCoy have another legendary argument, this time in front of Kirk. Spock wants to send the captain through as he is convinced that the intelligence of the captain would make him survive the transporter process. McCoy wants to be cautious and do more tests on the dead animal before they risk the captain's life. Kirk 1 makes the decision to get the transporter room ready. At the same time, he orders McCoy to continue testing the animal. Sulu calls in and reports that the temperature is at minus 117 degrees. It's incredible that they are all still alive. All right, but they are very, very close to death. It's here where we see Kirk 1 unbinding Kirk 2, and he said that they both needed to go through the transporter. Kirk 2 attacks him and knocks him out, and then heads to the bridge and orders the navigator to leave orbit. We see McCoy coming up to the bridge with Kirk 1, and then there is a struggle between the two. Kirk number 2 is afraid of what the transporter will do, and then he collapses in Kirk 1's arms. They go to the transporter room. Kirk 1 says, "Spock, if this doesn't work," he is unable to complete his sentence, and Spock acknowledged what Kirk was trying to say. He readies the transporter and sends both Kirks through. After a moment, Spock reverses it and only one Kirk materializes. He's very much alive, and he has been restored to what he normally is. He immediately orders the beam up of the crew on the planet. With everything restored to normal, the Enterprise leaves orbit and heads to the next mission. This was a very complex story. The premise was very, very intriguing. It is a mild exploration of the human psyche. The episode tried to examine what we would be like if the darker side of each of us were separated from our good side, and showed possibly what our lives would be like. The conclusion was that we need all facets of our personality to make us who we are. A very thought out, well-written story by Richard Matheson. The episode was completely centered on the acting talents of William Shatner. I imagine that Shatner would have had a very difficult time oscillating between Kirk's two sides. But nevertheless, I feel that overall he gave a great performance. When we first saw Kirk 2, the lighting, the camera angle, and the look in Shatner's eyes was very effective. That combined with the music made that moment very chilling and eerie. Unfortunately, Uhura is not part of this episode, and we still have yet to meet Mr. Chekhov. Leonard Nimoy and DeForest Kelley were fantastic as the supporting cast here, and I really feel that for the first time in the series, this showed what would become known as the trinity of characters between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy that made the series what it was. They were more than shipmates, they were brothers, and I really felt that that was good stuff here. Also, the camera angles and the effects were superb. The cinematography is wonderful. These were all elements that I really enjoyed. Now to the elements that I didn't like so much. Firstly, I felt that even though the episode primarily revolved around Kirk, too much emphasis was placed on him, while there could have been some more emphasis on the struggle of the crew stranded on the planet in the intense cold. All in all, I felt like they were more of a passing thought. I also feel that the attempted rape scene was too much and that it went on too long, and thankfully it stopped when it did. Finally, even though Shatner did a great job acting, the darker side of Kirk was often overacted, sometimes to the point of silliness. Overall, it was a very solid episode. I give it 3 out of 5 Starfleet insignias for awesomeness. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of the Mission Log, and I want to thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe and share this channel. It would really help me out a lot. Also, please feel free to leave a comment below and share what you liked or didn't like. It's certainly okay if you disagree with my assessment of this episode. All I ask is that in the comments we treat each other respectfully and that we keep the comments profanity free. And I want to invite you to join me next week as I review the classic episode, Mudd's Women. Until then, live long and prosper.